people think of German states under communist rule, they almost always think of the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany. But there also existed a German Socialist Republic before that, for a relatively short period of time from 1924 until 1941. It was called the Volga German Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic and was located inside the Soviet Union, along the Volga River. In this video, we're going to learn about the history of the state and its ethnic German population. First, let us talk about why German settlements existed inside Russia in the first place. This goes back to the reign of Russian Empress Catherine the Great in the 18th century. Catherine, who was herself of German descent, invited Europeans to settle inside her realm. The reasons for that were similar to the ones I talked about in my video about the Transylvanian Saxons. The area along the Volga River, where the German settlers would end up, was only sparsely populated, and the new citizens were supposed to cultivate the land and to defend it against possible raids from the east. Around 30,000 Germans followed her invitation, although many of them didn't survive the long journey to Russia. They were granted a lot of autonomy and rights. They had freedom of religion, could keep the German language as their administrative language, were exempt from military service for the Russian Empire, and could basically govern themselves. Despite the many problems at the beginning, the German settlers could achieve some modest prosperity until the end of the 18th century. The harvests were good and the population grew a lot. By 1850, around 165,000 Germans were already living in the Volga area. However, in the year 1871, the rights granted to the German settlers were almost completely revoked by Alexander II, who introduced a policy of Russification. This led to many Volga Germans leaving their home and emigrating to places like the US, Canada, Brazil or Argentina to preserve their culture and identity. Today in Argentina, 2.5 million people claim to be of Volga German descent, which accounts for roughly 5.7% of the country's total population. At the beginning of World War I, the ethnic Germans that lived inside Russia fought alongside the Russians against the German army. Many of them were also part of the Russian general staff. However, as the war went on, the ethnic Germans faced more and more discrimination and were often accused of collaboration with the German Reich. That's why most of them were sent to the Caucasus to fight against the Ottomans. In 1917, the Russian Empire collapsed and was replaced by the Soviet Union. The new state signed a treaty with the Central Powers and didn't participate in the war anymore. The territory of the Volga Germans was now inside the Soviet Union. There, the so-called Volga German Workers' Commune was founded by the new Soviet government in 1918. One of the people responsible for the founding of this commune was Ernst Reuter. He was a German socialist and prisoner of war in Russia during World War I. He learned the Russian language while he was in captivity and was happy to hear that the Russian government was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. The Soviets took notice of him because of his political views and his Russian language skills, and put him in charge of building an autonomous state for the German settlers in the Volga region, loyal to the Soviet government in Moscow. One way of securing their loyalty was to teach the children socialist views and values in school in the German language. Reuter would however leave the Soviet Union to Germany in 1918, after he heard of the November Revolution and the end of the monarchy there. One of the reasons why this region was of such importance to the Soviets were the rich grain harvests, who were vital to supply the urban centers like Moscow and Leningrad with food. However, during the Russian Civil War, the Bolsheviks demanded a huge share of their harvest, as well as recruits for the Red Army. This led to around 50,000 deaths among the Volga German population as a result of starvation. Any protests against the Soviet demands were forcefully put down by the Red Army. The food situation in most other parts of the Soviet Union wasn't better though, and the communist government requested foreign aid in 1921. This aid, especially from the American Relief Administration, saved the lives of millions within the Soviet Union. The German Red Cross also provided medical aid for the Volga region and tried to fight widespread diseases like cholera and malaria. But all of these foreign organizations had to leave the USSR in 1924. The situation in the Volga Republic was dire in the early 1920s. Besides the already mentioned problem of mass starvation, there were also other problems. Many people decided to emigrate out of the Soviet Union, which led to an even bigger population decrease. The local industry was also in a very bad shape, reaching only a third of its pre-war level. The Volga German leadership tried to fight these negative trends and planned on incorporating majorly Russian-speaking settlements into their territory, especially the Pokrovsk district, which would connect the commune to the Soviet train network. The Soviet government agreed to the proposal, and the territories were given to the Volga Germans. This increased the land area by 27% to around 25,000 square kilometers, and the population by 48% to around 500,000. The seat of the government was relocated to the newly incorporated city of Pokrovsk, or Kosakenstadt in German. The city was however renamed to Engels in 1931, in honor of the German communist philosopher Friedrich Engels. These territorial changes, combined with newly incorporated economic policies of the Soviet Union, improved the situation in the region, and in 1927 the local industry almost reached pre-war levels again. It wouldn't be long though until new problems arose. Joseph Stalin planned on turning the commune into a district and to decrease its autonomy even further. The ethnic Germans were alarmed by that and sent a delegation to Moscow to personally negotiate with Stalin. They were successful in their efforts, and he agreed to their proposal of turning the commune into an autonomous Soviet republic. This was made official at the beginning of 1924. The official languages of the new republic were German, Russian, and Ukrainian. The size of this newly formed republic was comparable to modern-day Belgium. Then, in 1929, the agricultural collectivization reform was introduced, which led to an even worse famine than in the years prior, the so-called Holodomor. Millions died as a result, and it is estimated that around 350,000 ethnic Germans were among the victims, although not all of them were from the Volga region. The Soviet Union, however, denied that the famine even happened, and presented the Volga German Republic as a proof of their tolerance, and also used it to better their relations with the Weimar Republic. Communists in Germany, on the other hand, talked highly of the First German Socialist Republic. The role of the local German government was basically to carry out directives that came from Moscow. But their autonomy status granted them nonetheless some important freedoms. The desires in matters like cultural life, higher education, or the German language in schools were all considered. With the rise to power of the National Socialists in the 1930s, the situation of the German minority group in Russia deteriorated a lot. The ethnic Germans were accused of being agents of Hitler's regime and were oftentimes victims of discrimination and even arrests. Things got a little better after the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1939. It was even planned that Adolf Hitler himself would visit the Volga German Republic in 1940, and preparations have already been made. These plans were however cancelled, and Hitler never visited them. In 1939, the Republic was home to around 600,000 people, of which roughly 60% were ethnic Germans. That is less than in 1926, mostly because of the already mentioned famine and deportations of the so-called kulaks, which is a Soviet term for peasants who owned more than 8 acres of land. Other big ethnic groups in the German Volga Republic were Russians and Ukrainians. With the start of Operation Barbarossa and the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the time of the Volga German Soviet Republic came to an end. The Soviet leadership found them guilty of collaboration with Nazi Germany and decided to deport all ethnic Germans in the region to Kazakhstan and Siberia, even though they were innocent of that crime. The communist police even razed whole German villages. They also searched people's homes, and if they found Nazi flags there, the inhabitants would be shot. Quite a lot of houses had such a flag, because they were given out in preparations for the planned visit of Hitler that never happened. The territory of the Republic was split between the Saratov and Stalingrad oblasts. The number of ethnic Germans inside the Soviet Union decreased as a result of the war, although not by a lot. In 1939, around 860,000 Germans lived there. 20 years later, the number went down to around 820,000, most of them living in Siberia and Kazakhstan. There were actually so many ethnic Germans living in Kazakhstan that a proposal was made in 1979, which called for a new German autonomous republic within the country. However, this project failed due to the resistance of the local population. The Volga Germans would never return to their old home along the river, even though exactly that almost happened in the 1980s and 1990s. The ethnic Germans in Russia, with the support of the German government, again urged the Russians to re-establish the old republic, and the Russian government was apparently also in favor of the idea. But once again, the resistance of the non-German population in the Volga region prevented it from ever becoming a reality. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, most ethnic Germans that remained in the former Soviet Union emigrated to Germany, similar to the Transylvanian Saxons. That's it for today's video, thank you for watching and see you next time.